Welcome to the Channel Surfers. I'm John McCabe, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host Jeff Lennon. How are you doing today, Jeff?
John, I'm doing well. Thank you, man. How about yourself?
Doing great. Other than my neighbor doing yard work and interrupting our recording, but everything's good. Everything's good. Um, so Jeff, we started a conversation a couple episodes ago about navigating layoffs in today's market, right? And we talked about the reality of a layoff and kind of the emotional and financial impact, and we talked about some hiring insights and what we know about what's going on in terms of when you submit your resume and the spinning wheel that you go through. Sometimes companies are just harvesting resumes and you're not making any progress, and the job seems very lucrative and interesting, but
Yeah.
it really isn't. So there's a lot of things affecting your capabilities when you're laid off. Today, I think we want to talk about two different topics. One, I want to talk about some stories of the affected, people that we know, ourselves included, and what it was like when a layoff happened and what we did. And then kind of end the conversation on strategies for bouncing back. What have I done? What have you done to kind of get over, being laid off and trying to get back into the working world? So I think we'll start off. You've been out and about, and you've heard a lot of really good stories from people that are in the industry.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll start with you. Just share some of your stories that you have. Don't mention names, and then we'll share our own stories about what it was like when we got laid off.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I'm going to dub this the great pivot. We did a podcast the other day. They talked about the great resignation. I'm going to call this the great pivot because
Yep.
the number of people within my own network that I've seen postings on LinkedIn and where they've gone through, they're actually out looking, and they're posting, hey, I'm open to an opportunity. There was a change. And I'll kind of dig into the stories, but as I get into the stories, what I found interesting, John, is, the hierarchy, so to speak, of what are the drivers, and it's interesting because obviously we're in a very interesting financial climate today. And I think, poor financial performance of an organization, that's always a big reason for, having the, quote unquote, restructuring, reorg thing that'll take place. Financial, pardon me, also affects, from a cost cutting measure, organizations are looking from a restructuring, they're going to cut costs, they're going to move groups around, they're going to shift priorities. And it all kind of falls under that whole restructuring an organization.
Yeah.
I've also seen merger acquisitions. You're hearing about, some of the acquisitions are ticking up right now. And I'm seeing people that, companies that were acquired about a year ago. And here we are now. Acquisition is done. It's final. And, they're deciding that they're going to move in a different direction. I know in my instance, one of those, it happened a lot quicker than a year. It was like a day. And but the point being is, if there's a merger acquisition, the new owners or the whoever's taking control is going to look at what's going on, and they're gonna make some changes. I also, from some of the conversations, there was change in leadership, right? So when there was a change in leadership, the new leadership came in and decided, the people that were there, it wasn't going to work for their structure. Kind
I
of
was a victim of that myself. Yep. I
yeah,
get that.
and it happens a lot more than people realize. I'll just share my 2 cents. I mean, you think that you're protected, but most places it's a right to work state, and they don't really need a big reason to let you go. I mean, they could say it's performance, they could say it's they can't discriminate against you, but they don't. There's so much latitude. It's not funny.
If they don't like the shirt you're wearing, they can get rid of you. They don't really
Yeah,
need a
so
whole
like
lot.
here we are, two
Yeah.
guys wearing Hawaiian shirts. We're probably out. They're like, we're over the hill kind of guys wearing,
We're,
or as I like to call the Mogs, wearing Hawaiian shirts. But
we're on the list. We're
yeah,
on that list.
So just kind of bringing it back, I after having a couple conversations, we had put a post out, for people to kind of DM us, and it was interesting because in the last, I'm going to say probably 8 months, I maybe even more than that, gosh, probably 9 or 10 months. I mean, I've had the personal opportunity to work with and interact with a handful of people that have been on the other side of the fence. They were given their walking papers, their pink slip, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
and it's a lot. So getting into the stories, because I think we touched on it, the mental aspect, but figuring out that pivot. What I found interesting is, and the reason I gave those different categories, John, is that's usually what the driver is. And it really comes down to a shift in the business, a shift in finances,
Yeah.
a shift in leadership. And the leadership can either be just something that they changed, a VP, SVP, or the company got acquired. And
Yeah, and
that's
let's also consider this. I mean, sometimes
sure,
people just aren't a match for a job. They aren't qualified or they don't do the work. And, unfortunately, it's a necessity to get rid of somebody who isn't performing, right? So that's another aspect of it. But I'd say that's
true.
rare,
That's true.
a much rarer condition or circumstance. And what you're highlighting is more of the more prevalent situations that companies are in where people get laid off.
Well, even shifts in the market. Like I think what you're seeing now, like there was a big, I would say fear, but a concern from a lot of people, like, oh my God, AI is going to take my job. And I'll say it once, I've said it probably on the last 10 podcasts. I mean, to me, AI in itself is an enabling technology. You're seeing AI go into so many different things. If you're not investing your time to learn, like investing in yourself, I think it's a Jim Rohn quote, invest more in yourself than you do your job and you'll go far. Um, you need to be investing in yourself every day, but upscaling getting your skill, and that gets into the strategy piece. But doing those things is critical because you are the product. You are the CEO of your own business, working for whoever. You go, you provide a service. And I've had that mindset for a long time where I'm the CEO of, Jeff, and that's kind of why I went off and did my JLen enterprise. But I'm the CEO of my own business. And when I'm working for a company, I work like, it's my business, right? And how many times have you had a job, John, where you tell people, hey, run it like it's your own business? And they're like, run it like it's my own business, but I work here. Um, but it's a mindset, how you approach things, how you plan, the goals you have,
Yeah.
how you
Yeah.
execute, how you want to, be fiduciary, have a fiduciary responsibility on how you're going to spend the money that you're doing for the job that you have, because you got to spend it like it's yours. I think it's a law. I don't want to say it's a law. It's probably a lost art. I don't think a lot of people look at
Mhm.
it like that. Um, but the stories, I was at an event up in New York, and I was blown away within about maybe six, seven conversations. I had three different people that were at different stages of having been laid off. One really nice girl, marketing.
Yep.
She had leaned into, she was working for a company. She wasn't directly in marketing at the time, and they were shorthanded. So she started leaning in to help. And the more she leaned in, the more they gave her. And it was, she was doing what she felt was the right thing for the company. And again, this is the story. Um,
Hmm.
but long story short, she, was trying to do what she, everything she could. She had her other job, her other responsibility. She had a different title, but because she was leaning into marketing, she started getting more visibility. Cut to the
Hmm.
chase, 9 months, 10 months later, there's new leadership that comes in. And within 2 weeks, she was given, her papers, and she was just,
Hmm.
hey, thanks, but we're going to go in a different direction with marketing. And she was, and again, that's what she was sharing. She's like, but I'm not in marketing. I'm helping, but my job is over here in this part of sales operations. Um, so, those,
It's funny though. I find like channel and marketing and even channel marketing, those are two areas where if there's, costs to be cut, they go after those areas first. They don't really touch sales necessarily unless they have, underperformers and dead wood. But I find like channel and marketing get cut more often than other areas, right?
well,
Because
they're not the high visibility,
no.
um, I one of the gentlemen that I was speaking with, he had actually just landed a new position. He was an inside sales BDR, SDR, and same thing. The company that he was at, he had actually been out of work. I think he said almost 5 months, and he ended up landing another job. But the reason that he ended up getting let go from where he was at is they had an inside sales team, and it was a combination of a shift in the market and leadership, according, from what I could gather. But it was a shift of those two components, and they were leveraging some AI technology, and they were at, again, they were looking at doing, I think, around 150 to 200 calls a day, and they got this AI tool, and they were like, "Hey, we can do 500 calls a day." And over a period of 2 months, whoever wasn't hitting that minimum benchmark was basically flagged, put on a plan, and within 30 days they were gone, because we're using a tool to do 500 calls a day. You shouldn't have a problem doing it. And I just found that interesting, that even with the automation of the tool, there was really a plan to see who they could weed out. Was my takeaway from his story. But what's interesting is this gentleman, and I'll call him Brian. He took that to heart, and his story, which I found really interesting, and I'll just share with people. He spent, while he was looking, he spent a tremendous amount of time researching the AI tools in the sales, framework, how they played. He got very familiar with the top 4 or 5, sales automation tools, and how they integrate with HubSpot and Salesforce, how he could leverage them. And he used that to his advantage when he started, looking at other jobs, because he could come in and hit the ground running. He knew the tools, he knew how to use them. I thought that was incredibly powerful. I mean, it was really a testament that, yeah, he got knocked down, but he wasn't going to stay down. And when he came back, he's actually, again, from the conversation, I think he's a stronger salesperson now. He's going to be a stronger BDR, and he's able to carry much more than he was carrying prior to his situation.
Yeah, I like that. That's a man after my own heart. I'm the same. I'll try to get better and be a better hire for the company. But that's interesting. Yeah, I know you had a lot of really interesting conversations at that event, and I see those stories are so common. And like I know people who they've been in VP of sales roles, and they've had multiple positions over 1, 2, 3 years, and they seem to be either picking the wrong company, or um, just aren't performing, or just not the right fit, right? And I know I have a really good friend, and they've been in that situation. They were out of work for a really long time, for like about a year,
Right.
and it's tough. I mean, I hate that people look at your resume and say, "Oh, you have a lot of stops." Like I have a lot of stops on my resume, but I've had companies that have gone bankrupt and gotten rid of everybody. I had my most recent situation, new leadership, and they wanted their channel guy in place, and they didn't want me, right? So there's when recruiters and companies look at your resume and they see all these stops, it's kind of unfair to judge you because you have a lot of stops, because there are circumstances. And my friend had a lot of circumstances. Like one of his companies went bankrupt. Another one was just, wasn't growing, and he wasn't really helping it grow. So they parted ways, right?
Right.
Another one, I think he just had conflict with leadership, and they didn't keep him on. So, those are situations where, when you're in the world of layoffs, you know, you have to examine, or actually just not blame yourself necessarily. I don't think it's right to blame yourself when a company lets you go. There's all sorts of factors. You mentioned a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
And from a mental state, you've got to forgive yourself for that, and just kind of sit yourself up, and like pick your pants up and start working to find another job, right? Not dwell. I made the mistake in my first layoff. I held it really tight. I was very upset and bitter about it for a long time, and it didn't help me any. And now I'm like, yeah, whatever. It was what, it was a situation, and I couldn't avoid it. And I've been laid off since, and it really hasn't affected me as much as
Yeah.
the first one, right? So, but people are, people. I'm sure there are a lot of stories, and if the audience is listening and you want to share your stories, please do. we'd love to maybe have you on to talk about it, because it's different for everyone. You know, you and I have had different situations. You were laid off during a COVID, purge. I was laid off because the company literally had no money, and they couldn't afford to pay anyone, so they let all the executives go.
Wow. Wow.
And I had a leadership change. So you mentioned a lot of the situations I lived, um, but again, it's part of the risk of taking a job. I love when I see people that have been there for like multiple years in a row and they're very solid, and I'm like, I really admire that. I would love to be that way. I'm trying to focus on really just being, long term with the clients that I have, and stick around and make some progress happen, right?
Yeah.
But it's just a crazy market, crazy work world, because things change. And like, I think in a couple of years back, the whole cybersecurity space, just too much money was being invested in companies. They were being pushed to grow quickly, and they weren't making any revenue. And what's the solution to that? You got to cut somewhere so you can
Exactly.
show money. You have money in the bank. So that was really something that I don't think is in anyone's, had anyone who was in that position didn't have control over it. That's just the executives, the leadership making, those decisions, and, kind of having to do something to fix it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I
So,
mean, well, look, here's the reality. I mean, and you make a good point. First of all, the only thing you can control is what you think and what you do. That's it.
mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
I can't control some VC, private equity. I can't control a VP. At the end of the day, I just need to do what I think is best, and hopefully there's outcomes that will come from that. I it's funny. I go back and I think to one of my favorite motivational guys. So, by the way, COVID, that whole situation, was a really, it was a good process for me because one, there was a whole thing I did with a team of people at that company, and we had a Zoom call every week, and we networked, and there was a beautiful outcome. And again, when you mentioned about having people reach out, I mean, it's not just the story like, hey, I got laid off, these guys suck. It's, hey, this was my situation, these were the challenges, right? The challenge becomes the way. I've been leaning into stoicism a lot over the last 8, 9 months, and that the challenge is the way. That you find that. But one of my favorite quotes from a guy named Les Brown was, don't let someone else's opinion of you become your reality. And when there's a situation and you're let go, right? That's somebody made an opinion of, okay, you're not going to make it here. No, we're not going to keep. That's fine. I mean, that's
I love that. I love that, because like, look, when you get the news, it hurts, right? And you start to think about,
oh
like, it was me. I wasn't a good employee, and like, you can't think that way. You got to, like, you know who you are, and you know how you work. And every position I got let go from, I was working hard. It just was circumstances, right? So I love that quote, because that's one of the things, like, when we talk about strategies, which we're going to move to in a second here. You need to forgive yourself and move forward, and just get over the fact that it was somebody's opinion. It wasn't necessarily what you
it's not your
stand for.
reality. Your reality is what you're going to make it. And it is the resiliency. We're do a lot in cybersecurity. We talk about cyber resiliency, and really, it's about the resiliency of people.
Mhm.
I've leaned into a lot of different, whether it be Les Brown, Brian Tracy, Jim Rohn, and they're all from a motivational standpoint. I mean, it's there's so many, but my point is, if it's something that's positive that's going to feed you, that's great. But coming back to that situation, I keep calling it the pivot. It's much more emotional than a pivot, right? But to your point, it is emotional. It's a personal
Yeah.
thing. I love when we say it's not personal, right? It is personal, and that initial hit, I mean, it hurts. There's a venom to it, and I've told a lot of people, like I said, over the last 9 months, I've had an opportunity to more so over the last 9 months, but I've done it a lot over my career. Like I said, the situation in COVID, we had 16, 18 people jumping on a call to talk about how do we network, who do we get our resumes. I still talk to a handful of those people today. One of the guys, he's got his own company, man. He's doing something really cool. He's an entrepreneur. I mean, and it's, it's those types of things that
Mhm.
that layoff, that job loss doesn't define you. It's what you do after the
Mhm.
fact. Another
Yeah.
great, I'm just going to throw it out there because if you haven't heard of Les Brown, got to look him up. Guy's got some super, super good stuff, super motivational, and he
Mm.
makes it real. But the one, I'm going to paraphrase it because I'll screw it up. But you don't have to be great to get started, but you got to get started. So after the situation happens, right? We've talked about this. Pause, right? Take a deep breath, gather your thoughts, get yourself, figure out, that this doesn't define you, but then you got to figure out, hey, I need a plan, right? We're kind of leaning into the strategy piece. Um, because to me, it's not about getting, I'll use that Rocky, right? It's not about getting knocked down. It's about how much you get, no matter, I'm going to screw that up. It's not about how hard you get hit, but it's about getting back up. And that's the
Yeah.
point. You get knocked down 7 times, you're up, right? So you're up and you're going to go for the eighth try. You don't stop, but taking the
Yeah. Yeah.
pause, starting to build out a plan. What do you want to do? I used to tell my kids this all the time. It's so easy. People say, "Well, what do you like?" And people go, "Hmm." And I always used to go to the other side and say, "Well, what don't you like? What was it that you didn't like? Figure out the things you don't like and you don't want to do, and all of a sudden you're left with, huh, maybe I should go in this direction." And part of it was a lot of times when people are said, "Well, what kind of a job would you like?" They struggle with that, but you got to get the process started. So if you start thinking about what you don't like, sometimes it just kickstarts that process.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've kind of like skipped into the strategy because you're talking. Well, I mean, look, there's some great tidbits there, like that networking group. I think that's phenomenal. I never did that. I think that's a great way. Like, and what we're trying to like, this podcast is here to educate and help people like ourselves that are in the channel and who are in leadership positions and trying to find jobs or are in jobs and get better at them. But the, let's talk about strategies because there's a lot of good things that we both have done. I love that networking group. That's something I think that is invaluable because it's like partnership leaders. When you go and ask a
Bingo.
group or a community,
Bingo.
they always have an answer for you, and they're supportive, right? That's the biggest thing. So I mean, bouncing back from a layoff, number one is get your mindset and mental health right, and we've talked about that a couple times in both episodes.
Agreed.
you know don't let it get you down. Like my first, I'll think about it for a couple hours and I'm upset, but then I'm like, let's get going. And I go out and I start looking for jobs. I have done a couple things. Like last year I was out of work and I realized my resume wasn't really getting through, and I didn't think it was a great resume. And I'd been lucky up until that point. I had really been, you know, referred into jobs, or people I work with wanted me to come work for them. So I didn't really need a resume, and they knew me. But then I was in a situation where there really weren't any people I knew that were hiring. And
Right.
I went to a guy, and I'll mention him here. His name is Rick Sears. He's amazing. He's on LinkedIn. He was able to revamp my resume so it was laced with all the right keywords and phrases to pass through all the resume systems that might cut you off. You don't have the right, wording or key phrases or key attributes that a company's looking for when you post for a job. So I did that as step number one, and it was amazing because I did get interviews. I was getting through and getting noticed. I could tell if you apply through LinkedIn, it tells you when your resume is being looked at, right? The other thing I did when I posted for a job, I went out and looked for, if they didn't show the hiring manager on the post, I would try to find who maybe the hiring manager was or the highest level
Yeah.
executive. And I went into my chat GPT, or as we call him, Chad. And Chad helped me create an email that was specific to the position with the company to tell them I'm interested and I want to set up time. And I did set that last sentence up to say, I'm available. How does Thursday at 10 a.m. work for you? I'm still a sales guy. I'm trying to sell them, and that worked tremendously. I was getting responses, I was getting interviews, and it finally led to me landing a job. Unfortunately, 5 months later, new leadership came in and they wanted their guy, but I went back right to the process, right, and it actually that's where the point of the fractional business came into play because I thought I could do this and I want to kind of control my own destiny and I don't have to worry about applying for jobs, right? But those are some of the things that I've done. Another thing, personal branding is really important. Like your LinkedIn page, if you don't realize how important that is, and having it really set up to show you as a very valuable asset to a company, then don't have LinkedIn because that is your way. That's your advertisement for anyone, and everybody looks at LinkedIn. Everybody, that it's just you can't avoid
True.
it. I look at LinkedIn when if I get an invite, I go and look at the person's background. I'm sure when you're looking to post for a position, the recruiters are going out and looking at my LinkedIn profile, right?
Yep.
Um, I think we talked about this leveraging networks. I'm part of partnership leaders. They helped me immensely when I was looking for work. You had that group, which your community was that group of people who were laid off, who were looking and having success, which I love.
We actually nicknamed it the Fallen. We had the
Yeah.
company name, and then we called ourselves the Fallen. And yeah, because it was a bloodletting. I'm not going to lie to people.
Yeah.
COVID hit, they let 30% of the company go. So it's hard enough when you get let go, but when you're let go in a boat of people, it to your point, it comes. And by the way, it comes back to your point there, John, which is the networking. And I just want to
Mhm.
reiterate, I think the upskilling, making
That was
sure
my
that
next point. You've covered that. And I think it's
go
a really
go
important part.
yeah go.
No, you go. Yeah, I was just saying that's part of what when you bounce back, you've got to like upskill and get certifications. And that story you told about the guy who went out and learned all about AI, that's beautiful. Like that's really the things you need to do. And Jeff, like we always say, I always want to be better. If you're trying to find a new job and you're laid off, make yourself better. Help improve yourself. Right. So go ahead about your point
Yeah.
because I think it makes
Well,
great
it,
sense.
it is. It's about upskilling yourself, and like you said, and it's going to go back. It's going to feed back into your LinkedIn, right? But
Mhm.
do it to be meaningful, right? Like I said, once you've identified, you set your kind of laid out your goals, then you build out that plan. And part of it is, hey, I need to strengthen myself around cloud, around security, around supply chain, around whatever it may be. Go look up. Find workshops. There's webinars out there, right?
Yep.
A big thing, and having a mentor or being in a mentor program is a two-way
Mhm.
street. There's people that are being mentored and menteed, but I can tell you for a fact that when you're helping somebody and you're being that mentor, I mean, you're learning from them as well, right? And then your other point, the partnership leader piece, just communities, looking at the
Mhm.
different communities. I was talking with a guy on the technical side, and he was part of the ISSA group, and I was like, you got to go to the meeting. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
and you probably should have been going because it's part of your network, and now you've got to kind of ramp that up, but that's a lot
Get
of like,
involved. Right?
yeah, but getting out there, connecting with people within the space, you'd be surprised. I think it just comes back to, having a plan, executing on it, but and, building on yourself and applying that to yourself. But as you just said, going through the AI tools that are out there. And by the way, I know just from looking at like on LinkedIn, for example, I mean, they've built a lot of that stuff right into LinkedIn. There used to be some tools that you could use. You can use chat, but a lot of stuff is built right in. It'll ask you questions. It'll tell you if your
Mhm.
resume is up there. It'll tell you if your job
Mhm.
profile fits. I'll tell you, I kind of come back to the story thing. I had this opportunity speaking with an SVP, and I may have mentioned it on the last one. If I didn't, or if I did, I apologize. Um, and because we had talked, hey, you look, and there's 150, 200 applications, 250 people applied, whatever. It's kind of daunting. And what this executive told me is a lot of times they'll end up having to repost the position because more than 70, 80% of the resumes they got didn't fit. They weren't
Yeah.
qualified. Like, people
Yeah.
didn't read the qualifications, and it's hard because you can't stop people from applying, but
Mhm.
and it goes up and down the board. I mean, this is again it was just one person, but it was interesting because I had not even thought of that. Like, wow, a lot of people just go in and hit auto apply, and next thing you know, there's 200, 250 people applied to a job, but they're not qualified for it. They don't have the
Yeah.
experience. They're not like, but anyway, uh,
Well, you and I have both been in hiring positions, and I could tell you, I've posted for channel manager roles, and the resumes I've gotten are crazy. Like a waiter, okay, you know how to handle customers, but do you know the partners? I could say there's one exception. Um, I hired a guy who owned his own company and sold it, and he was in technology, but he wasn't in cybersecurity necessarily, and he didn't have any channel manager experience, but he
Hmm.
was like our age, and he was passionate, and he's like, actually, his company was cybersecurity ish, and he dealt with some of the partners, but he wasn't my ideal candidate. And I ended up hiring him, and you know what? He was one of the best I ever hired. He was
Wow.
really phenomenal.
Wow.
And and then I hired a guy who was more of a sales engineer and not a channel guy, and he wanted to be in the channel, and he had the passion. And I'm like, I'm going to hire, and I've talked about this guy before. I hired him because he had hybrid capability. I could use him as a channel SE if I needed to, but he also was supporting my partners, and he did a phenomenal job. They loved him. So, sometimes you find a gem out of those piles of garbage. But I think you're right. Like it's tough when everybody who sees a posting is just throwing it out there to see if they can get a job.
Yeah.
You do need to be careful. That's why, like, you might not be having success, people, if you're throwing your resume into a job you're not qualified for. That's why you got to go and find the specific role that meets your qualifications, and you might get better results, right? I don't apply for jobs that are outside of what I've been doing. It's kind of a waste of your effort, right?
Yeah. Well, coming back to the resume piece, which I think it's evolved from what you said. Like what was his name? Rick Sears, you got with this
Mhm.
resume. I mean, I also think part of the complexity of in part of this pivot, right, is the shifting demands in the industry, right? The fact that you've got there's an increased focus on the automation, the AI, the digital transformation, all those things are happening. But more importantly, your resume, right? Being able to understand that you've got to shift towards this what is it, like the automated recruitment process that's happening,
Mm.
making sure. And by the way, you like your resume, if this guy went through, he probably made sure, and I'm going to kick myself because I cannot remember what it stands for, but the ATS, right? So when they're doing the
Yeah, that's
scanning,
it.
when they're scanning the
Yeah.
resumes, and then also the AI piece, making sure that it is kind of set up so that it's going to work through the scanning process to get you through, because that's what's happening. A lot of these are just getting scanned. And then I think the other piece is, to your point, the networking piece, right? Reaching out. I think that was a great point, right? Find out who the hiring manager is, make sure that you connect with the recruiting person. Also, look in your network to see who that may work there, because they're going to be potentially a two. They're not going to show
I
up
do that
immediately.
too. I reach out to the people who are there and let them know, and I send them my resume. But LinkedIn's great because they will tell you who works there, your LinkedIn or your school, that you went to the same college or whatever. But you're right, that's huge. And just to kind of like add a little bit more to partnership leaders, they actually have a job channel on their Slack channel, and there are job posts there, and they're posted by either partnership leader members who are looking, or they know someone that's looking, and you could reach out to them through the community and say, hey, I'm interested, or I know someone that's good for that role. And that takes you really, really a long way. In fact, the job I got last year, the woman who hired me, she was in partnership leaders. She talked to Asher Matthew, who's the one of the founders, and he vouched for me because he knows me. And that was one of the key factors in me getting that job. And she
Wow.
let me know that. So community, network, and really kind of focusing in on where you're best qualified for a role, those are really important. But
Yeah.
I think, to kind of sum it up, because we're running short on time here,
Oh yeah.
I think again, don't let it bring you down. It's just another step in your career.
Well, it's about
And
building resiliency, John, right? And
Mhm,
then we did talk about that, but you got to do that pause. I didn't mean to cut you off.
mhm,
Apologize. Right, but it's that you got to pause when it happens. But as you're going through the process and you're networking, it's about the resiliency piece, and
mhm.
I think it's overlooked, right? And making sure that you're managing the emotional impact, because you're going to have those. You're going to hit walls. You're gonna get rejection. I mean, as you're going through it, but
Yep.
lean on your network. Lean, have, if you don't have a somebody, I'll call them a coach, so to speak, somebody that you can talk to. Go to your network, have those people you can talk to. There's a, oh, gosh, I'm trying to remember. Anyway, I'll come back to it. But, you know, understanding the strategies of how to cope with that as you're building your resiliency, right? And understanding that it's not the end game, so to speak, right? It is something that you're going to get through this. It's not the
Yeah.
end, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just summarize,
Sure.
part one and part two. We talked about the reality of layoffs, the mental and financial, impact. We talked about hiring insights and market trends. We talked about, stories of people who were affected and what it meant to them and what it meant to us, right? And then lastly, strategies for bouncing back. And
Yep.
and I think what we're offering is, what we've experienced and what has helped us be successful. So I think in summary, getting laid off is probably the worst thing that could happen to you, but it can't let you be, it can't affect the way you move ahead, right? I love that quote you said, don't let somebody's opinion of you, like,
Be your
create your
reality. Be
reality. Yeah, I love that. And I think that's very important to know. If you're out there, you're listening, and you are out of work, just know you'll be working again soon. It's just a matter of time. I've said this quote before. I love it. When one door closes, another one opens, right? And it will open for you. And I honestly believe that. And if you work hard and you do all the things that you need to do to get work, it'll pay off, right? And everything we've kind of tipped you on
Yeah.
today and in our last episode will help as well. So, any
So
final any final closing comments on this, Jeff?
yeah, I was just, so it's funny. I was just going to say two final things. So, and most people that I've had the opportunity to engage with and work with as they were going through this process, and I know this is hard to believe, but at the time, it's hard to believe, but you will be in a better place.
Mm-hmm.
You will look back in 6 months to a year after whatever happened, and you will be in a better place than where you were, because for whatever reason, that time and that transition, needed to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And as you're going through this, I'm going to stress network, network, network. Everybody I've talked to, it is in the top three they talk about. And there was and I heard this a long time ago, but you are, what is it? You're the sum, or you're the average. You're the sum of the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that, when you're in that situation, it's so important to network and understand who you're networking with, because you want to make sure that you're networking with people that are going to help elevate you and help you to, and by the way, be honest and be real, right? Don't candy coat stuff, to be,
Is that a little like what my parents used to tell me? Like, tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you what you're like. Right? It's kind of a similar thing. Like,
exactly.
yeah, for sure.
No, exactly. So with that, I mean, like I said, there's I don't think there's anything earth shattering that we're sharing here right now, but what we'll do is we'll kind of compile some of this, and put out kind of like the top 5, 6 things, 7 things, whatever. I'm a big 3 guy, but I think there's a handful of things here that people should be aware of, and I can take from my experiences and yours, that we can share. And like I said, there's a bunch of people that I'm probably going to have them listen to this, because they were part of my journey. They were part of my journey, both when I went through it, and then I tried to be there for them when they went through it. And it's all about having that support network that comes back to the emotional and the mental piece. So with
Amen.
that,
I believe that wholeheartedly. Yep. So, well, look, I hope we helped someone who's listening. And if you want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us through email. I'm John at channelsurfers.com. Jeff is Jeff at channelsurfers.com. You could find us on all of the podcast services that are out there. And we also have a LinkedIn page, and you could DM us through the LinkedIn page as well. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your stories. That helps us to put together a show that will, highlight your story and help others who might be in that situation that haven't listened to our podcast before, right? So,
awesome.
yeah, feel free to reach out. Jeff, as always, great conversation, and thank you for co-hosting with me.
Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate the opportunity to co-host with you.
Good deal. Thanks, everyone.